Nobody wants to think about this, but the people who don't think about it are the ones who end up eating whatever's left on the shelf after everyone else has already been there. History has a habit of arriving without warning, and when it does, the question isn't who has the nicest kitchen, it's who has food that actually lasts. So here they are, the only 10 foods you need to survive if war starts tomorrow. Food number 10, white rice. There's a reason every military in history has fed its soldiers rice. It's not because armies are known for their culinary creativity. It's because rice works, reliably, cheaply, and for a very long time. White rice, stored correctly in an airtight container with an oxygen absorber, will last up to 25 to 30 years without meaningful degradation. Not months, decades. Brown rice doesn't come close. The natural oils in the bran layer go rancid within 6 to 12 months, which makes it a nutritional dead end for long-term storage. White rice loses some nutritional value in the milling process, but what it keeps is the thing that matters most in a crisis: shelf life and calories. A single pound of uncooked white rice contains roughly 1,600 calories. It expands significantly when cooked, about 3 times its dry volume, which means a 25-pound bag, stored in a sealed food-grade bucket with oxygen absorbers, represents a substantial caloric reserve that takes up very little space and costs almost nothing to build up over time. Rice has no meaningful flavor on its own, which sounds like a drawback until you realize it means it pairs with practically everything else on this list. It absorbs salt, fat, legumes, canned protein, spices, whatever you have. In prolonged emergency situations, food monotony becomes a genuine psychological problem. Rice mitigates that by being a neutral base rather than a dominant flavor. Armies, refugee populations, and disaster survivors have relied on it across every continent for thousands of years, not because they preferred it, but because it delivered calories and kept people moving when nothing else was available. In Japan, rice has historically been treated as a form of currency. Feudal lords were taxed in koku, units of rice equal to the amount needed to feed one person for a year. The logic was practical. Rice was the most reliable measure of actual human sustaining power available. That logic hasn't changed. The measuring unit has. On the practical side, the best storage method is a 5-gallon food-grade HDPE bucket, the kind sold at hardware stores and restaurant supply shops, with a gamma seal lid that allows easy access without breaking the container's integrity. Drop in 1 or 2 2,000 cubic centimeter oxygen absorbers, seal it, label it with the date, and stack it somewhere cool and dark. A single bucket holds roughly 33 pounds of white rice. That's somewhere in the range of 50,000 calories per bucket, enough to sustain one adult for several weeks at reduced intake. The cost of doing this is trivial. The cost of not doing it, under the wrong circumstances, is considerably harder to calculate. Food number 9, dried legumes, lentils, beans, chickpeas. If white rice is the foundation, dried legumes are the structural support that keeps the whole thing from collapsing. Legumes, specifically lentils, kidney beans, black beans, pinto beans, and chickpeas, are the most calorie-dense, protein-rich, and shelf-stable plant foods available to anyone who isn't running a commercial freeze-drying operation. Dried beans stored in sealed, oxygen-free containers have a shelf life of 25 to 30 years. Lentils, which require no soaking and cook faster than most beans, are particularly practical in a fuel-scarce situation. They're done in 20 to 30 minutes, compared to the hour or more that harder beans require. The nutritional case is straightforward. 1 cup of cooked lentils delivers roughly 18 grams of protein, 40 grams of carbohydrates, and 16 grams of dietary fiber. Beans provide similar numbers. In a scenario where meat is unavailable or unreliable, legumes become the primary protein source. And unlike animal protein, they require no refrigeration, no hunting, no slaughter, and no luck. The rice and legumes combination is not accidental. Together, the two provide a complete amino acid profile, what nutritionists call a complete protein. Rice is deficient in lysine. Legumes are deficient in methionine. Together, they cover each other's gaps. This is why the pairing appears independently in nearly every traditional food culture on Earth. Rice and dal in South Asia, rice and beans in Latin America and the Caribbean, rice and lentils in the Middle East. These combinations didn't develop because of nutritional science. They developed because populations that ate them survived. One storage note worth taking seriously: oxygen absorbers are essential for beans. Legumes stored in regular sealed containers, without oxygen removal, remain vulnerable to insect eggs already present in the dried product. Those eggs survive ordinary sealing. They don't survive an oxygen-free environment. This is not a minor issue. A 50-pound sack of beans that develops a weevil infestation in the 3rd month of a supply disruption is not a food reserve. It's a problem you sealed in a bucket and forgot about. The good news is that fixing this costs almost nothing. A bag of 100 oxygen absorbers, enough to seal dozens of storage containers, runs about $10 online. The absorbers work by reacting with the oxygen inside a sealed container, reducing the internal oxygen level to below 0.1%. At that level, insects cannot survive, oxidation stops, and the nutritional quality of the stored food is preserved almost indefinitely. This single step is the difference between a food reserve that actually works and one that fails quietly while you're not looking. Food number 8, salt. Salt is the oldest preservative in human history, and most modern people have forgotten what it actually does. Before refrigeration existed, which, for most of human history, it didn't, salt was how food stayed edible. It draws moisture out of food through osmosis, creating an environment hostile to the bacteria and mold that cause spoilage. Salted and dried meat, fish packed in salt, vegetables preserved in brine. These weren't delicacies. They were survival technology. Roman soldiers received part of their pay in salt. The Latin word for salary, salarium, traces directly to this practice. For long-term storage, plain, non-iodized table salt or sea salt is ideal. It has an indefinite shelf life when kept dry. Iodized salt loses its iodine potency over time, though it remains usable as a preservative. A reasonable emergency reserve is 10 pounds per person per year, which sounds like a lot until you account for its secondary uses: food preservation, water purification support, wound care in the absence of medical supplies, and barter. That last one is worth dwelling on. In serious, prolonged supply disruptions, the kind that follow war, not just a weekend storm, the economy reverts quickly to barter. Salt, historically, has always been one of the first things people start trading, because it's universally needed, easy to portion, and impossible to fabricate from most local environments. During the American Civil War, the Confederate Army actively targeted Union salt works in Virginia and Louisiana, recognizing that destroying the salt supply was a more effective long-term strategy than some battlefield engagements. Salt was, in that context, a strategic military target. It wasn't seasoning. It was infrastructure. Salt is born of the purest of parents, the sun and the sea. Pythagoras: store it in airtight containers. Moisture is its only real enemy. At 10 cents a pound in bulk, it's the cheapest item on this list, and one of the most irreplaceable. Food number 7, honey. Honey is the only food that archaeologists have found in ancient tombs and confirmed was still edible. Jars recovered from Egyptian burial sites, over 3,000 years old, contained honey that had not spoiled. That's not a marketing claim. That's a documented archaeological fact. The chemistry behind it is specific. Honey is hygroscopic. It draws moisture out of its environment and has a water activity so low that bacteria and mold cannot survive in it. Its natural acidity, combined with small amounts of hydrogen peroxide produced by the enzyme glucose oxidase, creates a biochemical environment that is simply hostile to microbial life. Sealed properly and kept away from moisture contamination, pure raw honey has an indefinite shelf life. Nutritionally, honey is a dense source of simple carbohydrates, roughly 64 calories per tablespoon, primarily fructose and glucose, which the body converts to energy quickly and efficiently. In a calorie-scarce environment, that matters. It also has documented antimicrobial properties that are relevant beyond the kitchen. Historically, honey was used to dress wounds before modern antiseptics existed. Manuka honey in particular has been studied extensively for its antibacterial properties and is used in clinical wound care today. In a prolonged disruption where medical supplies run short, this is not a minor footnote. The practical storage advice is simple: buy raw, unfiltered honey in glass jars. Commercially processed honey has often been diluted with water or corn syrup, which reduces shelf life dramatically and eliminates most of the antimicrobial properties. Check the moisture content on the label if available. Pure honey should have a moisture content below 20%. Honey that has crystallized has not spoiled. It has simply undergone a natural solidification process and can be returned to liquid form by gentle warming. One 5-pound jar of honey, stored properly, is both a caloric reserve and a first aid resource. At the intersection of those two things, it has no real substitute on a survival shelf. Food number 6. Canned fish, sardines, tuna, salmon. The most nutritionally dense canned food available is probably not what most people reach for first. Sardines, in particular, are extraordinary and are almost universally underestimated. A single can of sardines packed in olive oil contains roughly 200 calories, 23 grams of complete protein, and some of the highest concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids, calcium, vitamin D, and B12 available in any packaged food. The calcium comes from the bones, which are soft enough to eat and represent a significant nutritional advantage over boneless fish products. Sardines are also among the most sustainable fish available, reproduce quickly, and are at the bottom of the marine food chain, meaning they accumulate far less mercury than larger fish like tuna. Canned fish, in general, has a commercial shelf life of 3 to 5 years, though studies conducted by the U.S. military and independent food safety researchers have found that properly sealed cans can remain safe and nutritionally adequate considerably beyond that, provided the can is not compromised by rust, denting, or bulging. A bulging can is not a storage oversight. It is active biological contamination and should be discarded without opening. Tuna is the more familiar option and remains excellent. High protein, low fat, versatile. Salmon delivers similar protein along with higher omega-3 content. But sardines are cheaper per gram of protein than almost any other animal product on the market, which means a serious reserve can be built at relatively low cost. They also require no cooking, no preparation, and no added ingredients to be edible directly from the can. In a situation where fuel is scarce or open fire is a security risk, that matters considerably. A case of 12 cans of sardines costs roughly $15 to $20 at most grocery stores. That case represents approximately 2,400 calories and over 270 grams of complete protein. It stacks on a shelf, requires nothing from you, and will still be there in 4 years. Build a rotation, buy a case, eat from it, replace what you use, and you maintain a living reserve without ever having to think of it as prepping. You're just someone who buys sardines in bulk. There are worse things to be known for. Tell me what you eat, and I'll tell you what you are. Jean-Antelme Brillat-Savarin. In World War II, canned fish was a staple of military rations across multiple nations. The U.S. Army's C ration and K ration both included canned protein as a core component, specifically because it required no refrigeration, no preparation, and delivered sustained energy under field conditions. The military arrived at this conclusion through necessity. It still holds. Food number 5. Hardtack/Hardtack crackers. Hardtack has been feeding soldiers, sailors, and refugees for approximately 2,000 years. That's not an endorsement of the flavor. It's an acknowledgement that something this durable and this simple doesn't get replaced until something better comes along. Nothing better, for the specific purpose it serves, has come along. Hardtack is flour, water, and salt. That's it. Baked until all moisture is removed, the resulting cracker is essentially impervious to the conditions that ruin other foods. When stored in airtight containers, hardtack can last years, even decades. Civil War soldiers were sometimes issued hardtack stamped with the year 1861 while fighting in 1864, which gives you a reasonable sense of the timeline. They called it tooth dullers and worm castles, the latter because weevils occasionally took up residence inside the crackers. The standard field solution was to dunk the hardtack in coffee or water to drive the weevils out before eating. Not ideal, functional. The modern version of this principle is commercially produced pilot bread or crisp bread. Sailor Boy pilot bread, produced in Norway and distributed widely in Alaska, is a directly descended product with an official shelf life of 5 years and a documented practical life considerably longer. Wassa crisp bread and similar products operate on the same principle. very low moisture content baked into a dense, durable cracker that can be eaten plain, used as a base, or crumbled into soups. The caloric value is modest, roughly 100 calories per piece, but the shelf stability and ease of transport make it a practical component of any serious reserve. It requires no cooking, no water, no preparation. It can be eaten while moving. In conditions where stopping to cook is not an option, that simplicity is not a small thing. Commercial hardtack can also be made at home from flour, water, and salt with minimal equipment, which means it's one of the few items on this list that can be produced from other stored ingredients if the original supply runs out. If you store a 25-pound bag of all-purpose white flour alongside the rest of your reserve, flour lasts 10 years in a sealed bucket with oxygen absorbers. You have the raw material to produce hardtack indefinitely, provided you have salt and an oven or open fire. That self-replenishing quality is rare among shelf-stable foods and gives hardtack a practical versatility that more complex packaged products can't match. When the packaged food runs out, the ability to make more food from basic stored ingredients is not a skill, it's an insurance policy. Food number 4. Cooking oil, olive oil or coconut oil. Fat is the most calorie-dense macronutrient available, 9 calories per gram compared to 4 per gram for carbohydrates and protein. In a survival context, where caloric intake becomes the primary concern and daily physical demands often increase sharply, fat is not optional. It's what keeps the engine running when everything else is stretched thin. Olive oil, stored in a sealed, dark glass bottle away from heat and light, has a shelf life of 18 to 24 months and remains nutritionally sound for longer than that, even as it begins to lose flavor quality. Extra virgin olive oil is preferable for storage. The higher polyphenol content provides better resistance to oxidation. The single most important storage factor is darkness. Light degrades olive oil faster than heat does, which is why serious long-term storage should use opaque or dark containers rather than clear glass or plastic. Coconut oil is a useful alternative with a longer shelf life, up to 2 years at room temperature and longer when refrigerated. Its high saturated fat content makes it more resistant to rancidity than most plant oils, and its semi-solid texture at room temperature makes it more stable in a variety of storage environments. It also has documented antimicrobial properties due to its lauric acid content, which has some relevance in a medical supply scarce environment. Both oils serve the same core function. They add significant caloric density to otherwise low-fat staples like rice and beans. And they make food edible in the psychological sense as well as the caloric one. A diet of plain boiled rice with no fat added becomes nutritionally and psychologically difficult to sustain within days. The same rice cooked in oil with salt becomes a sustainable meal. There's also a fuel efficiency angle worth considering. Fat conducts and holds heat in ways that water-based cooking does not. Meaning oil-based cooking methods, frying, sautéing, even basic pan cooking, extract more usable energy from whatever fuel source you're working with. When firewood, propane, or any other fuel is finite and rationed, that efficiency matters. You cook faster, use less fuel, and produce food that has more calories per serving than the boiled equivalent. The U.S. Army Survival Manual specifically notes that fat deficiency in survival situations leads not just to weight loss, but to impaired cognitive function, reduced cold tolerance, and lowered morale, all of which have operational consequences in exactly the situations this list is designed for. The oil is not a luxury. It is part of the structural caloric architecture. Food number 3, multivitamins and vitamin C, ascorbic acid. This one is not food in the traditional sense, but it belongs on this list more than half the things people typically put on survival lists. The disease that killed more sailors than any naval battle in history was scurvy, a vitamin C deficiency that causes the connective tissue holding the human body together to literally break down. Wounds stop healing, old scars reopen, teeth loosen and fall out, the gums blacken. In its final stages, it's a form of biological unraveling that was, until the 18th century, simply accepted as the price of long sea voyages. Vasco da Gama lost roughly 100 of his 170 men to scurvy on his first voyage to India in 1497 and 1498. The British Royal Navy lost more men to scurvy in a single 18th century expedition than in combat during the same period. The solution, once James Linn's 1747 clinical trial finally established citrus as the answer, was embarrassingly simple: vitamin C. The human body cannot synthesize it internally and must obtain it from diet. In a survival situation where fresh fruits and vegetables are unavailable, which describes most serious, prolonged supply disruptions, scurvy can develop in as little as 4 to 6 weeks. Pure ascorbic acid powder is available in bulk, has a shelf life of 2 to 3 years when stored correctly, is inexpensive, and takes up almost no space. A daily dose of 65 to 90 milligrams, achievable with a fraction of a teaspoon of ascorbic acid powder, prevents scurvy entirely. A bottle of 1,000 vitamin C tablets costs a few dollars and represents years of daily supplementation. Broad-spectrum multivitamins address a wider range of potential deficiencies that develop when diet is restricted to a narrow range of stored staples. B vitamins, vitamin D, iron, and zinc all become relevant in extended disruption scenarios. This is not a supplement sales pitch. It's the lesson learned from every prolonged siege, every prisoner of war camp, every refugee population that survived months on restricted rations. The food keeps the body alive. The vitamins keep it functional. Food. Number 2, instant coffee and tea. This one will get some raised eyebrows, and that's fine. Caffeine is a psychoactive substance that approximately 2 billion people on Earth consume daily. In a sudden, severe disruption of normal life, the psychological component of survival is not separate from the physical component, it is part of it. Withdrawal from caffeine produces headaches, fatigue, impaired concentration, and irritability that can last 7 to 12 days. In a high-stress situation where clear thinking and operational capacity are critical, a week of caffeine withdrawal headaches is not a minor inconvenience. It's a genuine impairment. Beyond the withdrawal argument, instant coffee and loose-leaf tea both have very long shelf lives. Instant coffee in vacuum-sealed containers can last 20 to 25 years. Properly stored loose-leaf black tea holds quality for 2 to 3 years and remains safe to drink well beyond that. Green tea stores somewhat less reliably, but still maintains a multi-year shelf life. Tea has practical applications beyond morale. Black tea has mild antimicrobial properties. Tannic acid in tea can help reduce inflammation in mild wound care applications. Chamomile and peppermint, if included, provide a degree of digestive relief, relevant when diet changes abruptly and digestive distress becomes common. Tea is the magic key to the vault where my brain is kept. Francis Hardinge. The deeper argument here is psychological. In every documented account of prolonged human survival under adverse conditions, sieges, prisoner of war camps, disaster recovery, wartime rationing, the maintenance of small rituals and comforts has a disproportionate effect on morale and group cohesion. A hot cup of something familiar does not solve a supply crisis, but it changes the way people face one. The British government recognized this formally in World War II. Tea was among the first items placed under government rationing control in 1940, not because it was nutritionally critical, but because officials understood what removing it from daily life would do to civilian morale. They were right to take it seriously. Food. Number 1, apple cider vinegar. The last item on this list is the one that does the most jobs for the smallest amount of money and space, and is the one most people will skip buying right up until the moment they wish they hadn't. Apple cider vinegar, raw, unfiltered, with the mother intact, has an indefinite shelf life. It is self-preserving. Its acidity prevents microbial growth so effectively that it requires no refrigeration, no special storage conditions, and no oxygen management. A sealed glass bottle of apple cider vinegar sitting on a shelf will be usable in 20 years. The flavor may change slightly. The utility will not. Its primary survival application is food preservation. Vinegar pickling is one of the oldest preservation methods in existence. Vegetables submerged in a vinegar brine become shelf-stable for months without refrigeration. In a garden, forage, or barter economy that develops during extended disruption, the ability to preserve fresh produce quickly and cheaply is not a marginal skill. It's how food that exists today becomes food that's available in 3 months. Beyond preservation, apple cider vinegar has well-documented use as a cleaning agent and surface disinfectant, relevant when commercial cleaning products run short. Its acidity makes it effective against a range of common bacteria, though it is not a substitute for medical-grade antiseptics in wound care. It also functions as a digestive aid, a hair rinse, a mild antifungal treatment, and an ingredient in a range of basic home remedies that become relevant when pharmacies are inaccessible. The pickling application alone justifies its place on this list. A simple brine of apple cider vinegar, water, and salt will preserve cucumbers, carrots, onions, garlic, green beans, and most other garden vegetables for months without any canning equipment, without pressure processing, and without electricity. The vegetables go into a clean jar. The brine goes over them, the lid goes on. That's it. In a situation where a functioning garden or local trade network provides fresh produce intermittently, vinegar pickling is the bridge between food that exists today and food that's available in January. No other item on this list performs that specific function. The nutritional role is modest. Apple cider vinegar contains trace amounts of potassium, amino acids, and antioxidants. That's not why it's on this list. It's on this list because it extends the utility of everything else. It preserves other foods, cleans surfaces, addresses minor ailments, and contributes to food palatability in a restricted diet. At roughly $3 a bottle, it is the highest utility per dollar item available to anyone building a survival food reserve. Buy several bottles, store them in a cool, dark place. You will find uses for all of them. That's 10 foods. No freeze-dried astronaut meals, no expensive prepackaged survival kits, no equipment that requires a degree to operate, rice, legumes, salt, honey, canned fish, hardtack, cooking oil, vitamins, coffee or tea, and apple cider vinegar. Most of it available at any grocery store, most of it costing less than you'd spend on a single restaurant meal, all of it capable of sustaining a person through conditions that most of us have never had to seriously consider. None of this requires a bunker. It doesn't require a rural property, a generator, or a particular political worldview. It requires a shelf, a few sealed containers, and the willingness to spend a few hours and a modest amount of money on something you hope you'll never need. The total cost of building a meaningful 3-month reserve from this list, for one person, is somewhere between $150 and $300, depending on quantities and where you shop. That's not a significant financial commitment by almost any measure. What it represents is the difference between being a person who has options and a person who is waiting in a line hoping the shelves aren't empty. The people who fare best in genuinely bad situations are never the ones who had the most money when things fell apart. They're the ones who thought about it beforehand, quietly and without drama, and made a few simple decisions while they still had the option. If this gave you something to think about, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. There's more coming. History, preparedness, and the things that most people don't think about until they have to.